to call this meeting of the Governance and Policy Committee to order. And we'd like to then turn it over to our tech team with the acknowledgement of the traditional lands.
The land upon which we work, live, and sustain ourselves is the ancestral and treaty lands of the Michizagig Anishinaabe, also known today as the Mississaugas of the Credit, the rightful caretakers and title holders of this land. We also recognize the rich pre-contact history and relationships which include the Anishinaabe and the Ongwe-Hongwe.
Since European contact, this land continues to be home to Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. As responsible community members, we value the diversity, dignity, and worth of all people.
Colonialism displaced and dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their ancestral land
and continues to deny their basic human rights, dignities, and freedoms.
We are committed to learning true history to reconcile, make reparations, and fulfill our treaty obligations to the original peoples and our collective responsibilities to the lands, water, animals, and each other for future generations.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Now we'll go to the next item, approval of the agenda. Can I have someone put this on the floor? Trustee Benjamin's putting it on the floor, and do I have someone seconding it? Trustee Bailey, great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I assume the people online are saying aye as well?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect, thank you. The next item is the declaration of conflict of interest. Does anyone have any conflict of interest to declare?
No, I do not.
Okay, seeing none or hearing none, we'll move on to the approval of minutes. Trustee Alves, I know you have a question on this item. Are you able to ask it now, or should we just defer this item a little bit later when you're in the meeting personally?
If we could just defer it for about a minute or two, that'd be great. I'm just walking in.
Okay, so what we're going to do is move the item approval of the minutes of the January 18th governance meeting to a little bit later in the agenda. Maybe we'll do it after maybe the first staff report, if that's okay. I don't think I need approval or anything like that. No. We have no delegations today is item 6, so we're going to move on to staff reports. So we're going to move on to, I think it's coordinating principal, Janet Jakowski, to give this report on supporting students with prevalent medical conditions policy.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. My name is Janet Jakowski. I'm Acting Senior Manager for Social Emotional Learning in Special Education and Social Emotional Learning Department. And I'd like to present for recommendations and receipt the draft policy supporting students with prevalent medical needs. Through PPM 161, the Ministry of Education expects all school boards to develop and maintain a policy to support students in schools who have prevalent medical conditions. Prevalent medical conditions refer to asthma, diabetes, epilepsy, or risk for anaphylaxis, which have the potential to result in a medical incident or a life-threatening medical emergency. The Supporting Students with Prevalent Medical Conditions policy was drafted through internal consultation and in accordance with the Education Act, PPM 161, Ryan's Law, Sabrina's Law, related legislation and board policies and procedures, including but not limited to policies 51, 54, 86, 88, and operating procedures SESS 5, 8, 9, 16, and 18. This policy will be the overarching policy that supports the existing Peel District School Board guidelines that address anaphylactic allergies, asthma, and diabetes management. In accordance with PPM 161, the purpose of the policy is to support Peel District School Board students with prevalent medical conditions to fully access school in a safe, accepting, and healthy learning environment that supports well-being, and empower students with prevalent medical conditions as confident, capable learners to reach their full potential for self-management of their medical conditions according to their plan of care. This policy sets out requirements for collection of personal information, plans of care, supporting daily or routine independent management, emergency response, partnership with stakeholders, safety considerations, and liability protection. This policy also outlines the roles and responsibilities of parents, students, school staff, principals, relevant ministries, and external partners, and the board itself. Once approved, the communication to the system leadership, central staff, and school staff will be ESB internal and external websites. The next steps moving forward are to migrate existing relevant guidelines for special education and social emotional learning to an operating procedure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Janet. It's good to see you again. Does anyone here, I guess, first of all, let's put this on the floor. Does someone want to put this on the floor? Okay,
I
Trustee
will.
Alves, and someone wants to second that, Trustee Benjamin. Does anyone want to make any comments or have any questions? Trustee Bailey.
So I noticed in the policy.
Could put your mic on so she can hear you. Thank you.
So I noticed in the policy, it states it will be reviewed within the first 30 days of the child being in school, right? So what happens if that child has an emergency prior to the review happening?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Chair. So if the student is an existing student, the previous plan of care stays in place until a new one is created, and most medical emergencies are managed at the school level through calling 911 or other emergency procedures if no medical plan is in place.
But what happens during that case? So let's say allergy or asthma attack. You're just gonna call 911? Or
So usually, and the plan of care for asthma is very similar to that. Is calling 911 or using the medications as outlined in either a previous plan of care or something that has been reviewed by a parent guardian upon registration of a new student.
so each child, when they're registered for the first time, before they start, the plan is reviewed prior to starting?
Yes, through you, Chair. The registration form includes relevant allergy information and medical condition information, and the person receiving the registration will usually, as a part of their intake process, call that to the attention of the school administration, who will then, review the plans of care with the family, with the guardian, and request the parts that need to be filled out by a physician or family to be filled out at that time.
Thank you.
And can I just follow up on that, Janet? So, we get onboarding first time in kindergarten, senior kindergarten, and we have this, but we also, I had my son, grade 3, found out he was allergic to peanuts. So you have people just coming who are already in the school board. So just help me understand the onboarding. I think that's what, our trustee Bailey was going. What is the process of an onboarding? So I've just found out my child has a serious medical condition that falls within this policy. What is the process that a parent goes through?
Thank you, Chair. And through you, Chair, so a parent or guardian will bring to the attention of the school staff that a new allergy or new medical condition has been discovered. At that time, they sit with the school principal or administration, a relevant, alpha VP in high school or principal or vice principal in elementary. The school staff goes over with the parent, if it's trigger foods, if there's, for example, with asthma, sometimes it's, cold weather, like any triggers that might be present. And the school right then and there, and they may create, a note in SIS at that, like a medical pop-up box immediately, and then the relevant paperwork is sent with the family or the caregiver to be filled out by the relevant parts by the caregiver. If there's any medications or any, the possibility of administration of medication at school, those forms are sent to be assigned by a physician. But in any case, SIS, for example, our student information system, if you were to click on the registration that the child is asthmatic or they have a life-threatening allergy, there is a generic plan of care or emergency plan of care that is populated that will, that has the, administration of, say, an EpiPen, the calling of 911, things like that. That's automatically populated. Then the plan of care is updated, and then the information is sort of personalized if it's different from what the generic plan of care would be, or emergency response plan is on SIS. And that's, again, it's updated year on year.
Thank you, and that's good. And I know the policy references the various laws, one being Sabrina's law, and I think, like my son having an EpiPen and everyone is anaphylactic, you have to have an EpiPen sitting in the office as well as, with your child as well, right? And I think there's also procedures that then come from it, not just from the policy, or the policy creates the overarching stuff, but then the board goes and creates this procedure process in which how you as principals and staff administer this policy in each school, right?
Yes, Chair, that is correct. And the like I said, there's a generic plan that's in place until a personalized plan is created. And there are a few plans that are not currently part of our SIS system that will be added after this policy is approved, and then we go to update our systems.
Awesome. Thank you for that information. I have Trustee Benjamin has a question.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, will these students be provided busing irrespective of where they live? Are they provided busing to and from school, because they have these kind of medical, they have asthma, or they have their epilepsy or diabetic students? Are they provided busing?
Through you, Chair, each transportation request, medical transportation request, is dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So some students may have, asthma that's quite under control, and they don't require any special transportation or anything at all, unless there's an emergency. Others do have triggers in the winter and so on. So the family would apply in a separate process through the school again for medical busing, and that each one is accompanied by a medical note and a description of the reasons why medical busing is being applied for, and then that's reviewed by transportation and granted or not granted.
Okay, thank you. And a follow-up to the questions that were asked earlier, are the bus drivers also trained? Because suppose there is an episode in the bus when the student is traveling to or from school and suddenly has a epileptic attack or a severe asthma attack, are the drivers also trained to take action,
Through you, Chair, yes.
Staff is given training.
Yes.
They are all informed about it, but what happens if the student is on the bus?
Yes, through you, Chair, the bus companies do train their drivers in all of the relevant laws, like Sabrina's law, Ryan's law, all the ones with the concussion protocols, anaphylaxis. Anyone who works with children should, in the province of Ontario, is supposed to be trained in those. So our bus companies do train their drivers to respond, and each driver has a list of their students on the bus and the prevalent medical conditions. If there is possibility of an emergency or life-threatening situation, that is noted on the bus driver's roster.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Trustee Promoli.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for all of your work on this. I was really glad to hear more about this from Kevin Lecter when we were talking about this earlier, and I really appreciate the work to strengthen our approach to this to make sure we're doing everything we can to make school as safe and appropriate for our kids as possible. I had a question already, but I have a quick one just about your response there, that anyone should be trained in concussion and anaphylaxis protocols who are already working with children. I understand that that isn't the standard, though, for our teachers and education workers, that we're not finding, and I don't know if it's specifically for anaphylaxis and concussion that you're referring to, or beyond that when it comes to further like first aid or CPR training. What I understand is that we only have maybe a handful of people at any given school who may be trained in these approaches, and I wonder if I have that wrong.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Chair. Each staff member, adult staff member working with children is required to do mandatory training at the beginning of every school year. So it's part of our opening professional learning. So that's Ryan's Law, which is concussions, Sabrina's Law, which is the anaphylaxis and others. So we have quite an extensive list of modules that each staff member working directly with children needs to complete at the beginning of every school year, and they have to sign off the compliance of those modules, and that's tracked through our Vista system, our HR management system. So they have to complete the online module and click that they have completed and that they understand the training that has been presented to them. Where you might think there might be a handful is each school is required to have 2 qualified first aiders, so first aid with CPRC. So that's separate from the compliance training at the beginning of the year. So the handful kind of might be those first aiders, because there are only required to be 2 in each school.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Yeah, I wasn't sure what the exact number was, so I hope the handful was just quite vague, but I do really appreciate that response. So, as we're looking to further improve the safety measures taken to, in case there are these incidents for these particular children, I was wondering if this would affect the onus on the board to further consider harm reduction abilities and responsibilities. So if we're talking about students with asthma, if we're talking about students who do deal with or are at risk of anaphylaxis, does that, do we have sort of an increased responsibility to consider things like air quality in our schools, or just the measures that we're taking around particular allergies? I'm just curious if what we're doing here further increases that responsibility for us as a board.
Are you able to answer that, or?
Through you, Chair, I don't believe it does increase our responsibility. So we have, for example, responsibility to provide, a certain air quality. And if there's a question about that, for example, a safety partner can be dispatched to measure air quality. So, for example, we used to get this question all the time with portables. With families not wanting their children to learn in portables because they thought maybe perhaps there would be mold or increased allergens, and they make the request through their school principal, and the school principal then engages a safety partner to do an air quality test. So it's not a higher standard because it is the same standard for everyone. But if there's questions about the presence of a particular, allergen such as mold or air quality, there are mechanisms in place to ensure that is we are in compliance with our standards set by the ministry.
Thank you so much for that response. That was very helpful. I had one more thing, and I'm not positive this is the right place to ask it, but if we do have sort of that minimum number of 2 staff members at any school who are required to be trained in CPR and first aid, recognizing that people get sick, people could be away at any time, is there a way to adjust that number so that if those 2 staff members happen to be away at the same time, that we still have someone on staff who is prepared to help if there's an emergency of this type?
through you, Chair. I'm not sure I can answer that question because we, the number is usually 2, and quite frankly, as a school principal, I'm pretty sure I did most of the Band-Aids and ice, the magic ice that were sort of required. But the front office staff is quite prepared to deal with emergencies and understanding emergency procedures. So if there was something other than minor bumps or scrapes or bruises, and a judgment call had to be made, the principal, vice principal, teacher in charge, or front office staff makes a judgment call whether or not to call 911 or ambulance. And so there will always be that standard of care. If people are not sure what to do, 911 is called, and the family is then called at the same time.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Good. Any more questions? Anyone online want to ask a question? Seeing none, I will put this to a vote for receipt of this policy. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. All those against? Okay. Approval. Oh, it's approval. Sorry, we're approving.
Yeah, I'm recommending approval by the board.
We're recommending approval by the trustees to then go to the board. So again, let's vote for that. All those in favor for approval?
I'm not on the committee.
Yeah, I know. I'm just looking around, just see.
Aye.
And all those against? So this passes and is approved, and we'll go to the next board meeting, I guess. Great. So we're going to move on to, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to 5.1. Talking about approval the approval of the minutes from the committee meeting back in January 18th. So can I have someone put it on the floor? Trustee Alves, and seconded by Trustee Benjamin. Do we have any comments or questions before we approve this? Yes, Trustee Alves.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for delaying it. My question is for staff. I believe at the last meeting we asked for staff to present the clarification on the report for the definition of plagiarism.
Okay.
Finally respond to
Yes,
that
please.
interview, Mr. Chair. Yes, this meeting actually this evening was an additional meeting that we added because of the requirements from a legislative perspective to have the prevalent medical conditions and the concussion policy. So that response to your question is coming to the regularly scheduled April meeting.
Good with me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so any other comments, questions? Okay, all those in approval of the meeting minutes? Okay, here have passed and approved it. Thank you. And we'll move on to 7.2, the concussion prevention and intervention policy by Superintendent Hoppy. Would you take the floor and present this policy, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I would like to submit for receipt that the concussion prevention and intervention policy attached as Appendix 1 be recommended for approval by the Board of Trustees and replace the existing policy 84, concussion prevention and intervention. Peel District School Board is committed to reducing the risk of injury and raising awareness of the signs and symptoms of concussions and knowledge of how to properly manage and diagnose concussion. The policy applies to all employees, students, parents/guardians, coaches, team trainers, officials, and volunteers, and applies to all inter-school activities, whether on-site, school site, or off-school site, intramural activities, self-induced behaviors, as well as any activities where concussions can occur, such as during physical education classes, playground time, or school-based sports activities. The policy outlines the requirements for procedures, actions, training, and resources necessary to comply with legislation, as well as best practices for concussion management. The Ontario government enacted Rowan's Law, Concussion Safety, 2018 on March 7, 2018. The Education Act was also amended to provide the Minister of Education with the authority to require school boards to comply with policy and guidelines on concussions. Policy Program Memorandum Number 158, PPM 158, which came into effect on January 31, 2020, was issued by the Minister of Education requiring all school boards in Ontario to have a policy on concussion safety for students that meets certain minimum requirements. The Minister of Education has further provided that the Ontario Physical and Health Education Association, OPHEA, concussion protocol outlined in the Ontario Physical Safety Activity Safety Standards in Education is the minimum standard for risk management practices related to concussions. The Peel District School Board recognizes the importance of the health, safety, and overall well-being of its students and staff, and that these are essential preconditions for effective learning. PDSB is committed to promoting awareness of safety in schools and reducing the risk of injury, and specifically awareness of the signs and symptoms of concussions and knowledge of how to properly manage a diagnosed concussion. The policy complies with and is in accordance with the Education Act, Roman's Law, and the Ministry's PPM 158. The policies align with and supports the principles and expectations of PDSB's Human Rights Policy 51, the Equity and Inclusive Education Policy number 54, and the Anti-Racism Policy. At all times, this policy is to be interpreted to be consistent with the Ontario Human Rights Code, the Accessibilities for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, AODA, and relevant board policies and procedures. Research demonstrates that a concussion can have a significant impact on an individual cognitively, physically, emotionally, and or socially. Children and adolescents are among those at greatest risk for concussions. While there's potential for concussion at any time, there is body trauma. The risk is greatest during activities where collisions can occur, such as during physical education classes, playground time, or school-based sports activities. Educators and school staff, employees, play a crucial role in the identification of a suspected concussion, as well as the ongoing monitoring and management of a student with a concussion. Awareness of the signs and symptoms of concussions and knowledge of how to properly manage a diagnosed concussion is critical in students' recovery and is essential in helping to prevent the student from returning to learning or physical activities too soon and risking further complications. It is a joint responsibility of parents, students, employees, and the community to promote student health and safety and to foster healthy and safe environments in which students can learn. This policy reinforces the Peel District School Board's dedication to the health, safety, and overall well-being of its students and staff. And this reinforcement builds trust and confidence in the Peel District School Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Hoppy. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, Trustee Benjamin.
It's more like an observation. I'm very glad that we are bringing up this policy, to keep our kids safe. And you mentioned in 4.1 that, children are at risk of concussion, about staff and school staff, employees and educators, what they need to do. So one of the things I just want to point out, and this is a kind of a personal thing, because my grandson was in school in 2022 at 4 years old. The first day of school, after having been in daycare, he goes to this big school and he must have been excited. They took him out to the creative playground outside, which is concrete surface, and he runs very fast. He ran, he was playing, he fell down, hurt his forehead on the concrete surface and had a big bump. And we got a call from the school saying, your child, the grandchild is here, is crying, he's got this big lump on his forehead, what do? We have put ice. I said, okay, you know what? We want our kids to learn how to deal with it, of course. So we said, okay, stay with him, let him remain there, let's see what happens. So he stayed, came back at the end of the day, and the lump was still there. And we were worried, 4-year-old kid, whether how would it affect him? So talking about the surfaces on which our kids are playing, recently a principal also had this to share with me. She said that this is a middle school in my ward, and the surface on which the kids are playing is asphalt. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. So she says there is no proper surface for the kids to play, because when you play basketball or volleyball or dodgeball or whatever, and sometimes kids can be, very involved in their game. They may be pushed, they may do things, and when they fall, they get hurt badly because of the surface. So some of the schools, I think, have what is called the special surface provided for games like handball or whatever. I don't know much. So I said I'll talk about this because this could be one of the reasons for concussion. We are talking about while playing a game or while playing intramural sports and things like that. But it could also happen while children are in the process of just playing during lunchtime. They like to run around, they like to play with the ball, and so on and so forth. So the hard surfaces, the concrete surfaces in our schools, are they safe? That's my question. And the second thing is uh, in 4.6, it says that we are going to provide this kind of concussion awareness to all people across the board, that is staff, employees, parents, and so on and so forth, coaches, team trainers, etc. But one of the things that I want to bring up, okay, before I forget, there's another incident of concussion which happened in the school bus. School bus, a child was hit by another student on the head. And this was I think grade 3 student hit by a grade 4 student while the bus was traveling, and he had a black eye and so on and so forth. And the doctor said he has a mild concussion. So physical violence, where a child is taking it out on another child because something happened in the classroom. And that is happening at the end of the day, not under the supervision of the teacher. So the driver is driving, and this is happening at the end of the in the bus. So that is another point I want to bring up, that it can not happen only on the playground or during sport. The second thing is about the code of conduct that is expected of everybody, in sports, whether it is you're playing in the school or intramural or whatever. The important thing that we have to notice is today's kids are more prone to being very violent. And I think violence is increasing, especially after COVID, among everybody, I feel among all generations. So we also need to constantly and on an ongoing basis try to also tell our parents, talk to the kids, tell them that this is not acceptable, don't use your hands, learn to deal with situations, stop, pause, and before you react, kind of. So we need to try to teach our kids to deal with this, because once again, it's coming from a family of kids in our school. The two brothers, maybe one in grade 3, one in grade 5, are constantly hitting each other, fighting, and so on and so forth. My daughter happened to see this, and she's told the parents, this is not acceptable, because if this is happening in school, then the kids will be pulled up for it, because they are dealing in, physical violence. So please stop this, even at home, even if it's just, kind of playing around. We need to make them understand that this will not be acceptable in the schools. So I just wanted to share it, because
Okay.
I think violence is one of the things that could be.
Let's let the superintendent, you just put a lot of stuff out there. I think in the future, just let everyone, one question at a time, because I hope Superintendent Hoppy has written all the.
Superintendent Hoppy, I hope I was not too fast, or.
Are you able to respond
Not
to
a
all this?
problem. I was taking note, Chair, so I will be able
Okay.
to respond. Yes, I will be able to respond. So the first one that you made, Trustee Benjamin, that you raised has to do with the surface, the asphalt surface. In regards to concussions, unfortunately, it's not in only one particular domain or area in which these can occur. They can occur in any situation, and that was articulated in the policy around anywhere where collisions can occur. So as much as the concern that was raised around asphalt may be there, I would say that our asphalt surfaces are still very safe surfaces for students to be able to engage in different various activities, as they've done for many years. In relationship to the concussion protocol, that is something that why we have the training that we do at the start of the school year, to make people aware of the safety measures that need to be taken place. And as a result of the fact that concussions can occur on other textured surfaces, as well as and including asphalt surfaces. So the steps that we're taking are preventative, in that we are informing people, both staff and students, of what needs to be done, so that way, as they conduct themselves throughout the course of the year, they can take the necessary steps to prevent this from the likelihood of something happening from occurring. To your second point in terms of the school bus, as my colleague mentioned in regards to the previous policy that was brought forward, in terms of what we do have in place as a third-party provider for transportation for the board, all of the staff are required to make sure that they go through the necessary training in regards to concussion protocols as part of the bevy of preventative measures that they need to be aware of in terms of being able to be a bus driver and be able to transport our students safely to and from various locations. So unfortunately, some unfortunate situation that you mentioned that did occur on the bus. But in terms of the staff being aware of what needs to be done, that is part of their training and that is part of the expectation in terms of how they would now need to support children who would find themselves, again, with the suspicion of a concussion, what the appropriate steps would need to be in terms of addressing that. And then the third point that you raised in terms of students being more prone to violence, or all generations, as you mentioned, being more prone to violence, I think what I'm about to share applies to everybody, in that we need to all draw on greater conflict resolution strategies and skills to mitigate and prevent the opportunities from escalating to that point of violence. And I know that is something that we promote on a daily basis in all of our classrooms, through all of our schools, because we are a place of learning. And so this is one of the areas. Our social activities is very important to a conducive and safe working and learning environment. And so conflict resolution is something that we do know that we emphasize to make sure that students do have the necessary strategies and skills so that way they can avoid coming to a physical feel that a physical response is the necessary one to be able to address whatever their challenges are. So I do believe that as a board, we do have all the necessary steps and procedures in place. We constantly reinforce them, and that we are, again, through this particular policy, continuing to be able to provide the necessary framework so that way this is something that will be able to continue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent Hoppy. I have two people online with questions. The first one will come from Trustee Green.
Just quickly, Chair, and thank you, Superintendent. I just got a quick comment. Glad to see this policy, just around, especially training, because I had a situation, one school that I represent, where that child fell down, and staff just put the child there to sit in the front office and wait for parents to come instead of calling the ambulance or to check to see, and only to find that this child suffered a concussion, spend a couple of days in the hospital. So my question is around how do staff know that the training is available? Is there a link, or is it the in-person training? And if there's a link, could that link be shared with us? Because I would love to participate in that training myself.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. The training is part of a variety of different modules and different opportunities that our staff are given the opportunity to engage in at the start of each school year. And so since this has come into effect, this particular Rowan's Law has come into effect in the past few years, it's primarily been through modules because we've been online. So the likelihood of students, when it first came into effect, actually engaging in high-risk behavior that might lead to that was greatly reduced as a result of being online. But now that we are resuming back to our normal activities, the manner in which this information is shared and disseminated among staff is through different modules. And so that is something that is available to staff and is mandatory, as a matter of fact, that all staff do need to sign off at the start of the school year to now say that they've engaged in this procedure, in this module, and that they're aware of the necessary procedures to address a suspected concussion, because a medical practitioner is the only one that can actually diagnose a concussion. So that is how we are able to ensure that all staff are given the necessary information. For the second part to your question, in terms of being able to be aware of what it is that's being shared, I'm quite sure that that's something that we can look at and be able to share accordingly in terms of what is the information. But I would need to take that back specifically in terms of the actual accessing of the module. But as far as the content is concerned, that's something I'm quite sure we should be able to share with you without any difficulty.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We'll go to the next question online. Trustee McDonald, you have your hand up for a question?
Yes, thank you. I have two questions and a comment. I was just saying that it was referred that kids today are more prone to violence, but I think we have to be careful in our language without any data to say that, because people may challenge that perception of our youth today. You know, society's mores and norms have changed, and what is acceptable now, a couple years ago was not. Sorry, what is not acceptable now, a couple years ago, was pretty acceptable in terms of hazing, and so I think when we make sweeping statements about kids today being prone to violence, we need to be careful how we say that without any hard data to back that up. And it would be interesting to see, like, compare apples with apples when we comparing the data within our school board. That being said, I was just wondering if lunchroom supervisors were included as employees that receive the training.
That's an excellent, sorry, through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. That's an excellent question. The language within the policy does state that all staff do need to be made aware of Rowan's Law and the necessary procedures. But I cannot speak specifically to the process that lunchroom supervisors may have come in, may have been onboarded with this particular training, but the expectation as per this updated policy that we are submitting would require that all staff, including lunchroom supervisors, would need to become familiar with this. But I can't speak to that specifically in terms of what has happened over the past year.
Okay, thank you for that. Also, in terms of the training modules, do you know how often the training modules themselves are updated?
So through you, Chair, the training modules are updated on an as-needed basis based off of the minimum standard that is set by the ministry. And so we, OFIA, that was mentioned previously, are the ones who set that minimum standard. And so each year we ensure that what we have is in compliance with those minimum standards. And so they are reviewed on an annual basis to ensure that what is being brought forward for the staff to be able to receive in training, they are in compliance with that.
Okay, thank you. Because I know there was a situation where, and why I asked about updating modules, where a student had a concussion, but what was seen from the administration's point was that the student fell and ran away and left the school. So police were called, brought the kid back, and actually was consequence for it. And it wasn't until in discussion with the investigation, and after the consequence was appealed, that it was found out that the kid was sleeping on the floor, that the kids didn't know how long, and got up and ran away from the school. And then they realized he was hit in the head, had a concussion, and was on the floor sleeping. So that's why I'm wondering, in terms of training, how do you, because if you have a kid, let's say, because one of the signs of a concussion or symptom is people can act out of their normal behavior. So if you have a kid that, is not a runner normally and just starts running, like what circumstances led to that kid being running, and even getting treatment for such a student. So for example, if lunchroom supervisors see kids sleeping on the floor, do we intervene and sort of say, are you playing? Are you sleeping? Because in that case, everybody thought the kid was napping. The kid actually was passed out from a concussion, right? So that's what I was wondering, in terms of, it's one thing to have these training modules. Do we update them with anecdotes and possibility of things that have happened, like real life examples that probably, didn't happen, so they weren't discussed in a module or training, that probably needs to be updated and put into a training manual? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Through you, Chair, just as an aside, in terms of this particular policy, we're very proud of what this policy, all that it entails, because it is an update. We had an existing policy. This is an update, and we are very proud of the scope and the reach of this update. And so by virtue of that, it would now entail, again, as you had queried in terms of lunchroom supervisors, by them being now staff, they would now come under the umbrella of who would need to receive this training. So thank you for the comment. And again, through if this policy is accepted, it would be a lot more encompassing, and we'd be very happy with that.
And thank you to you and your team for the hard work. I appreciate that. And when it's time to vote, I will accept the policy. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee McDonald. I have next Trustee Alves for a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Through your chair, my question is about the reporting, and I may have missed it in reviewing the policy, but in this policy and through its implementation, is there a provision relating to the centralization and reporting of this information, and will that information on level and frequency of concussions be shared with the Board of Trustees?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. There is no provision to report back to the trustees in terms of the number of concussions that have occurred at a particular location or a particular school. However, there is provisions for the schools to be able to keep the information in terms of what happens in terms of overall safety and well-being for their students, but there is no official reporting mechanism that requires them to now collate and to share this information.
Sorry. And report annually to the Board of Trustees. I suppose I have a follow-up, Chairman. May I see that again?
Yeah. If you don't ask it, I'll ask.
Thank you, Chairman. A follow-up question through your chair, through your Superintendent Hoppy. Section 410 notes that a report annually to the Board of Trustees on the activities to implement this policy, and report to the Minister of Education upon request on the activities to achieve the requirements outlined in this policy and related procedures. Would 410, I guess my question is, would 410 include the reporting of centralized data regarding concussions to any which region or location and frequency?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. So what Section 410 is referring to is, again, in the implementation of the policy and ensuring that the activities that we need to go through in order to ensure that the policy is being administered effectively and is outlined, that reporting is what Section 410 is referring to. It is not referring to the aggregated data that would happen based on all of the different possible concussions that would have occurred in a year being, again, compiled centrally and then sent out in a particular report. That's not what that section is referring to, no.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you, Chairman. I suppose I have one more follow-up, and apologies for my confusion. I do appreciate the clarification, sir. Section 4.9 references a tracking system shall be developed and implemented to track a student's progress from removal from an activity due to suspected concussion and so on. So in section 4.9, would then we be able to view the aggregated data?
So thank you for the question, through you, Chair. Section 4.9 is, again, looking at making sure that the individual student that may be suffering a concussion and looking to come back and be able to resume their regular activities, that we as a board and as a school specifically are making sure that they've taken all necessary steps to ensure the safety and well-being of that student. In terms of again, collating and sharing that information, I would need to look into that, because my concern would be around matters of privacy, and gathering information in aggregate is something that we can look into, and I can bring the answer back to you in that regard. But that is not the intention of what is outlined currently within 4.9 nor in 4.10.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the clarification. And I suppose my one question would be, perhaps that would be something that I think would be helpful if we could look at that information through a lens of non-identifiable metric, just raw data, statistics. How many concussions are happening? Are they up year over year? Are they down? Where are they happening the most? Perhaps elementary, high school, perhaps that information could be included. Oh, and thank you, Trustee Bailey. Perhaps we could also include in that data the cause of the concussion and perhaps, what that looks like, if there's a trend there, sports injury, physical violence, whatever it may be.
Thank you for the question and the comment, the feedback. I will definitely take that back to share with my team, and I will be in a subsequent meeting be able to report back based on the information that we're able to gather.
Thank you kindly, and I appreciate the clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions or comments? So we have it on the floor, so we're just now going to go for approval to take it to the board meeting later this month. So those all in favor?
Just a quick point of clarification. So this would be to approve it as is, or would these amendments come before the board?
We haven't done an amendment to it. You haven't put a motion on the floor. If you want to amend the policy, you would amend it here right now, or you can amend it on the floor at the board meeting. If it gets approved as is now, you can amend it on the floor. Maybe we'll hear back by that time the comment from Superintendent Hoppy of what can be done, and he can then bring that as part of the introduction of this policy at the board meeting.
I suppose that, I think that would be fine. Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay. Yeah, I think that's okay.
Okay, so all those in favor of approving this, those on and those against? And online, there are for or against?
I am for.
Okay, so the motion, this policy carries and goes to the next board meeting. Okay. Thank you. We're now going to go to item 7.3. It's the information access and privacy that's going to be presented by Arena Sharp. Sorry? Sorry, just one second. I put it on the floor, sorry. Okay, yes, it was him.
That was the minutes.
Okay, I apologize. Okay, so who's the mover? Who would like to move this on the floor?
I would like to move it.
Okay, and who would like to second? Trustee Benjamin. Apologize. Okay, good. We're back to 7.3 and Arena Sharp. Oriana Sharp. Apologize.
No problem. Yes, through you, Chair. I'm Oriana Sharp. I'm the Privacy and Information Officer. The Freedom of Information and Privacy Policy number 88 was approved by the Board of Trustees on November 10th, 2020. The Information Access and Privacy Policy, which is before you today, if approved, will repeal and replace the existing policy. Providing access to records and protecting privacy are legislative obligations under the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, or MFIPA, the Personal Health Information Protection Act, or PHIPA, the Education Act, Child, Youth, and Family Services Act, and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The new policy is divided into two parts: how individuals and groups can access information, and how the board maintains the privacy of personal information, personal health information, and confidential information. It recognizes that it is an important ethical and professional requirement and a legal requirement in the relationship between the PDSB and individuals or third parties whose information is handled in the course of providing services. In 2019, the PDSB engaged KPMG to conduct an audit of its records management practices. While the focus was on the records management lifecycle controls, KPMG also identified associated privacy observations and risks as to the collection and use of personal information. The audit revealed that there was a gap in training, communication, and consistent practices in the records management space, but more significantly surrounding privacy. In September 2022, the board hired a privacy and information officer to develop and lead in the creation of a comprehensive privacy program. The Information Access and Privacy Policy more accurately provides a framework for all levels of staff to handle requests for information and respect the privacy and confidentiality of individuals. The Freedom of Information and Privacy Policy provided the initial basic requirements, but this new policy is more fulsome in its content and direction. This brings the board in line with the ministry requirements, and FIPA and PHIPA, and the expectations of the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner. Thank you.
Okay, so who would like to put this on the floor? Trustee Ellis, and who would like to second that? Trustee Bailey. Okay, no, it's done. Okay, anyone have any comments or questions? Trustee Ellis?
Thank you, Chairman. Through you, Chairman, just a simple question, and perhaps it's, forgive me if I'm repeating something, or perhaps I didn't notice a change, but would it be possible for us to just understand, maybe a quick overview of what is specifically different from what we had to what we're going to, maybe just like a quick high-level summary of, quick key facts of what is now included that was missing?
Thank you, I was going to ask that.
Thanks, sir.
Yes. So the main changes is that we added the two basic sections, the access to information and the protection of privacy. And the old policy listed the definitions from the legislation itself and listed a number of privacy standards. This new policy now adds in information for us to be able to conduct things like privacy impact assessments and respond to privacy breaches. So there will be associated procedures with these additions.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Anyone else have questions here? Online, Trustee McDonald, I see your hand is up. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I have a few questions. The first question to you, Chair, is there any, I don't know if it's going to be in the policy or is this in the procedure, any intention to have a tracking system that similar to the Peel Regional Police, that you can track records of anyone once they access OSR records electronically? So there's a paper trace as to who is going into whose records and why. And hospitals do the same thing.
Yes, when there's the onboarding of the new student information system, we're going to make sure that there is an audit trail so we can track that. I don't think the current SIS has that ability to do that down to the granular level.
Okay, thank you. No, it doesn't. Thank you. I appreciate that. My other question is with the paper records. Now, I see in the policy that you address that in terms of storage of paper records. So is there, again, I don't know if this is in the policy or if it's in the procedure, but how do you monitor, for example, schools on an individual level? Because I have been placed in rooms to wait and there are boxes of OSR records, and that's really concerning to me. So I'm just wondering, how do we monitor that each site that has records, even old records, that they are securely stored in each building? How is that monitored?
So last week, I presented an OSR procedure to the Directors Council, and it was approved. So we're going to roll that out. It maintains a retention schedule, an OSR procedure, and a handbook for principals, superintendents, and office admin staff. So we are going to be rolling that out on a go-forward basis. We understand that individual schools have problems. The main issue is the 55-year retention, and it's prohibitive on space. So we have a contractor to do off-site record storage. So I'm going to encourage the individual schools to use that service to store records on an ongoing basis.
Okay, thank you. And then is there some kind of monitoring or reminders to the staff that it's not supposed to? Okay.
Yeah. So the whole board retention schedule is going to go to Directors Council in the next couple weeks. So all staff should be made aware, or will be made aware, of the retention of those records. And we're going to encourage staff to take training on how to better manage the records.
Okay, great, thank you. Because I really hope by the end of the training that, we'll never have a situation again where people are asked to sit in a room to wait and all the OSRs are in boxes there. Thank you
Yes,
for that.
I understand that issue. Yeah.
Yeah. And on page 3 of 11, 3.4, it reads, head, and you have means the individual selected by resolution of the Board of Trustees to make access decisions on behalf of the board and oversees the administration of the legislation. Now, I'm just wondering what happens if the head, whoever that individual is the person in question for, information. I think it will be tricky to have the head making a decision about what information he or she is going to release.
Yes. Maybe Catherine wants to step in with that. Sorry, Catherine, I caught you off guard.
Hope that's okay. I was just attending to another issue here happening behind the scenes. Trustee McDonald, could you repeat that last piece of the question, please?
Yes, sure, no problem. So I was just mentioning on page 3 of 11, 3.4, and through you, Chair, I see here the definition. It says head means the individual selected by resolution of the Board of Trustees to make access decisions on behalf of the board and oversees the administration of the legislation. So I'm just wondering what happens if that head is the person or the individual that someone is requesting information about. Let's say, in terms of who would oversee it if it's being requested by this person.
So the head is identified as Catherine. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Catherine is the head. Okay.
Yes, I'm the head.
Okay.
And that was established by board resolution that the general counsel for the board is the head of privacy under MFIPA.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you very much. And then on page 8, on page 8 of 11, can you address that in that question? And then the other one. Okay, so now Appendix 1 and Roman numeral 4. The personal health information, in terms of how do you protect individuals from accessing. So let's say there's an issue and a staff would come and say, I want to get in touch with an individual trustee. How do you prevent the personal addresses or information of trustees? Because I see here we are covered under this policy. How do you control who has access to or giving out such information?
So trustees do not have the same access rights as staff. So trustees would have to make a request through the privacy office to gain that information.
No, sorry. Let me rephrase my question. I don't want access to the information. I don't want people accessing my information. So I want to know, how do you prevent? So if somebody comes, yes, I'm a public as elected by the public. However, if you don't want your personal home address, etc., being released in your, how do you ensure that you contain that kind of information from the general staff member, general staff, they're 19,000 employees. Yeah.
And thank you for that question, Trustee McDonald. And I'll pass it over to our governance leadership here.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. The information that is stored in relation to trustees is protected under MFIPA as well. So if it's under the care, control, and custody of the board, then that information is only available through a proper MFIPA request. That request would be redacted. Any personal information would be redacted, so it would not be provided. So if your question is, if you don't want your address released, your address would not be released because that's personal information, even if they submitted an MFIPA request.
Okay.
Your
thank you
information
very
is protected the same as other individual personal information that's in the care and control of the board.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And that includes staff too, right? Not only the general public. So
That
staff.
is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee McDonald. Any other questions or comments? I see no more hands online, so we have a put on the floor and a seconder. So it's now all those in favor of this policy to go to the next board meeting. I have approval here in person, so we're good. Any dissenters? Okay, we approve this. Moving on to now our 7.4. It's the trustee staff relations policy. Our governance council, Lockyer, will introduce this to our team.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. The policy has been before this committee before, and there was a recommendation made by the committee that went to the board that was not approved. And instead, the policy is back here for your reconsideration at this time. I can go over the policy again, but I don't think it's probably necessary. Seeing some agreement around the table. The policy is before you, and I'm in your hands if you have any further questions.
Thank you. So we're going to open, I will put it on the floor again and get a seconder. So Trustee Ellis puts it on the floor, and do I have a seconder? Trustee Benjamin. So
I just want to be clear though.
Okay.
Trustee Ellis, if you're putting it on the table, that means you're voting in favor of the recommendation. Is that what you're doing? The recommendation is to send it to the board for approval.
Oh,
So I just want to
sorry.
be sure
Sorry.
what motion we're actually putting on the
Sorry,
floor.
I misunderstood. Thank you for interrupting me.
Yeah,
I thought we were putting
I
this
thought
on
you
the
could
floor.
put it on the
for
floor and
comment.
vote against it.
No, you can second it and vote against it,
Okay.
but not
Sorry,
put it on the
my
floor.
apologies.
So who wants to put it on the floor? Someone want to put this policy on the floor?
What happens if it doesn't go on the floor?
It can simply be received and the policy is done.
Okay.
So somebody has to put it on.
No, you could just receive it like this.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm looking for someone to put it on the floor. So we have two people online. Trustee Green or Trustee McDonald can do that.
Okay.
Trustee Green or Trustee McDonald, are you going to put it on the floor? So since I have no one to put it on the floor, the policy sits in abeyance and it can't come back for a year? Or?
It can come back.
You can come back whenever.
It can come back whenever?
Yes, it can come back at the call of the committee. It can come
Oh,
back.
okay, okay. And that's just the chair and you.
We can add it to the
We can add the agenda. Okay, so that is now taken care of. We'll now go to the last thing on our agenda, which is trustee motions for consideration. I have none.
I think I might have one for the next meeting.
So you have to
Oh,
provide that.
48-hour notice.
Yeah, sorry.
That's my fault.
Yeah, and so trustees notice the motion, we have none from a previous meeting that we're coming from. So we'll go to item 10, adjournment. Does someone want to put that on the floor? I have trustee Bailey, seconded by trustee Alves. All those in favor of adjournment? Carried.